Okay, so in this video we're going to cover how to make a contour model. Um, so you just start off with your model or any object at this point, and you can also do this in Rhino. So if you going to go to my four views, if I type in the command contour, select the object. I have a couple options up here. I can do join curves by contour plane. I can group them if I wanted to. I'm going to select somewhere from the bottom of the surface, and I'm going to make sure I have ortho turned on. And going straight up. I hit enter, and it's contouring the entire surface, or the entire object. I can move these pieces out of the way. And right now it's just giving me contouring with curves. Right, if I were to have selected a different orientation, so I'm doing contour again, but this time going left to right, and I'm just holding, making sure ortho is on, and now it's contouring that object in a different direction. Right, obviously the one thing you want to double check is the distance. So once you assign like the direction, you can then type in the distance. So say for example, if you're doing an 1/8 inch material, you can type in 0.125, or if you're doing 1/4 inch, you can type in 0.25. So that's one way to do it, just directly through Rhino. But we're going to be setting this up in Grasshopper. So I'm going to open that up. And I want to, I'm going to just double click and put in the contour component. There's a couple of contours. The one I'm looking for is to contour a B-rep. So the first thing that it's asking for is the shape, and I can see that it's by that black hexagon symbol, it's asking for some type of geometry. So I go looking for that symbol, and there it is, geometry. I set that. I plug that in. I'm going to need a point, but it's already giving me one at 0, 0, 0. The direction, we're going to get to that in a second. The next thing I'm going to do is just type in, put in a number slider so I can have the distance or the thickness for my material, for example. Here I'm going to go into wireframe so you can see this a little bit better. I'm going to unpreview my geometry. So again, what the contour is doing is just giving us a set of curves. Right, but here I'm able to adjust the thickness. So depending on what how thick my material is, I can adjust it right here. The direction, by default, it's 0, 0, 1, so that means it's going straight up. If I change the vector, the direction of the vector, I can go to, for example, change it in the x units, and now it's contouring in the x unit. Or I can change it to the y, plug that in instead, and now it's contouring in the y. One thing you might notice in this example is my model is not centered. Here you can see this, the red line, it's not centered. My end pieces are coming out in different sizes. So here's this one, which is a little bit larger. This one on this side is a little bit smaller. So one thing I can do obviously is I can move the model, or another really useful thing to do is just to set a Rhino point and plug that into Grasshopper. So I'm going to put a Rhino point somewhere in here. Let's see, set one point. So now as I move this from there to that point, because it's in the center of my model, all these pieces, the end pieces, should be identical. So if you wanted to, you could also set a point. I'm going to change it. Actually, I'm just going to delete this. Just for now, I just want this being contoured in the Z direction. And again, this contour is just giving us planes. But if I want to turn this into an actual surface, I can just type in or look for a boundary surface. Plug that in. I'm going to change my thickness to 1/8 of an inch. So now what I have after I bake these I grouped them, just it makes it easier to select these. And when I go into shaded mode, I essentially have all these individual surfaces that I can unroll and get them ready for the laser cutter, and essentially have them ready for the model. Now, a few tricks just to show you. One is, once you have all these pieces cut, how do you then begin to line them up, just to make sure that you have them all in the exact same location. Let me delete this. So one way of doing this is to set up, let me turn off a couple things. So I just hit the space bar to have that little thing pop up. One thing I can do is I can have like a wooden dowel, like a 1/4 inch wooden dowel. So I'm going to do 0.25, 0.25, and extrude this. And essentially what I want is to Boolean difference the wooden dowel from this object. I think I really don't want to do this in Rhino. I'd rather just do this in Grasshopper. So in order to do it in Grasshopper, I need to look for intersect. In Grasshopper, it's not called Boolean. It's just called the solid difference. And here, what it's asking for is my my initial B-rep, and then the one that's going to be subtracting from it. So then I'm going to insert 2 B-reps, copy and paste, plug those in. The first one that goes into A is going to be set to my object. The second one is going to be set to the wooden dowel. If I unpreview both of those, I'm going to go back into wireframe. I can see now that that's cutting through. Obviously I don't want it cutting all the way through. So I either make this a little bit smaller, or I move it towards the back. I have to be careful that I don't go too far back, or else it's going to stick out on the bottom side. There, I think I got lucky and it's just barely on the inside. So for example, if I were to bake this, and take a look at this, I can see that I have that wooden dowel that sticks all the way through. So when I start to contour it, I have that as a way to line everything up. So let's test it. I'm going to move this off to the side, plug this one in instead. I'm going to see if everything works. This is turned off. Now I'm going to bake these. Select them, move them off to the side. And if I go into my shaded mode, I should have these pieces that have the that are cut out for the wooden dowels to go through. Now the one problem I'm running into is I have the wooden dowel, but because of the way my shape is set up, I don't have the wooden dowel running through all the pieces. So I have the wooden dowel. Let me ungroup this. Running through, that's my last shape that has the wooden dowel in it, through it. And then all of these that are above, I'm going to have to essentially guess. Or I can put in 2 wooden dowels. Right, I can't really do anything to the first one because I can't scoot it over any further, right? Because it would be sticking outside on the bottom. So let me delete these. Let me start a new wooden, go back to my wireframe. I'm gonna unpreview that. I'm just gonna copy this over, move this up some distance. That's okay if there's parts of it that are doubled up, that's alright. I'm gonna just have to add this. Let's see, set multiple B reps, that one and that one. So now I have both of them working. The only trick is now this one is cutting through on the top. So if I try to make this one smaller, scale 1D, I'm gonna run into an issue, and that issue is I'm gonna want this to be just slightly below the top surface. The only problem is once it goes inside the surface, the Boolean command doesn't work. And the main reason why, essentially, whenever you have any solid object in Rhino, it's really just a hollow object. It's not actually solid. Just imagine this as a shoebox. So if I try to Boolean difference another object on the inside, oops. And it's just floating there. If I try, even as a Rhino command, if I try to do a difference, it just won't allow it. And the main reason why, it's as if there's a shoebox and then there's another shoebox floating on the inside. And there's really nothing to make a difference of. So that's the only trick with trying to make this into a difference. So if you run into this case, you might have to do something slightly different. So instead of doing a difference, what you'll have to do is, let's see, let me go back to my intersect. You might have to trim. So I'm going to put in a trim component. want to do is I'm going to put this back the way it was. I'm going to make sure that it's still working. Seems like it's still working. Let's see, let me hide this object. There it is. Alright, so now essentially what I want to do is I'm going to have to trim. And what I want to trim is the boundary, all these individual surfaces. Alright, so if I hover over the S on trim, this is the shape to trim. These are the trimming shapes, which is essentially this B-rep. I'm going to preview it just to make sure that they're still connected. Yep, they're the two green ones. So I'm just going to disconnect this one, move this over here, and connect it over here. So if I unpreview this boundary, I now have this trimmed shape turned on. And if I zoom in, I can see that it's trimming all these pieces. And one thing I want to be careful about is this is really close to the edge on where it's getting trimmed. So when I have the physical model, I actually might see that little part right there. So what I'm going to do to this, just to this one, I'm just going to move it. Just going to move it down just a little bit. There it is. Now it's just updated. So that part, that one piece, I'm going to move it down just a little bit more just in case. That one piece won't get trimmed. And the nice thing about this, I can see the live update to see, obviously because it's running through Grasshopper, the way it's going to look. And the same thing is true for this top one. All right, the one thing I don't want is I don't want to see where the wooden dowels are located. So what I don't want is to have that top one sticking through this top piece, because then I'll be able to see the wooden dowel. So I just want that just slightly below, and then that last piece will be the only piece I'll essentially have to eyeball, and then it'll cover up the wooden dowel. And it looks like there's enough pieces where they overlap. Alright, I can extend this just a little bit more. I'll use scale 1D. Just bring it down a little bit, just so that there's a little bit more overlap. So maybe I have 1, 2, 3 pieces that the wooden dowels will overlap. So now at this point, I can bake this last part. I'll group them. I can select them. And now if I go into my shaded mode, let me ungroup these. So there's that top piece, which is essentially covering up that hole where the wooden dowel is going to go. And I have the rest of these. I can see right here the location where that wooden dowel will be essentially connecting all these pieces. I can see at the bottom. There's the wooden dowel. So I can laser cut all these pieces and put my model together. So here's one final look at this version of my contour model. My previous version, I just had the solid difference with a B-rep, and this one was substituting this one.